The van smelled like cardboard and cold coffee, and Nora Vance was already 3 minutes behind before she even pulled out of the loading bay. She merged into morning traffic with one hand on the wheel and a route manifest balanced on her knee, 42 stops between her and a hot shower, 42 addresses she had never visited in a city she knew from boardrooms and helicopters, but not from its streets, not like this, not from the inside of a vehicle held together by hope and a recent oil change. The radio was broken. The heater worked on one side. She wore a green uniform with a number on the back, 4481, and a baseball cap pulled low over her forehead, and not a single person in the last 4 hours had looked at her with anything other than complete disinterest. That was the point. Nora Vance was 44 years old, the founder and sole majority shareholder of Vance Delivery Group, a logistics company she had built from a single leased truck and a borrowed parking space into a national operation worth close to $2.5 billion. Her face had appeared on the cover of 2 business magazines. Her board of directors had collectively told her, in the polished language that boards use when they mean something blunter, that she needed to delegate more, trust her systems, and stop doing things that created liability exposure. She had smiled at them the way she always smiled when people told her what she needed. Then she had gone back to her office and booked a flight to Chicago. This was her third undercover visit in 18 months. The Memphis facility had produced 1 genuinely good shift supervisor and 3 managers who were dismissed before the following Monday. The facility in Columbus had been fine, functional, even warm, and she had left it with nothing more than a few notes on storage layout and a renewed confidence that her hiring process occasionally produced exactly the right people. Chicago was different. Chicago had been quietly bothering her for 6 weeks. On paper, the Chicago hub was a success. Customer satisfaction scores were in the top quarter of all Vance facilities. Delivery times were excellent. The numbers that the dashboard showed were clean and green, and exactly the kind of numbers that made quarterly calls easy. But one number had not cooperated. Employee turnover at the Chicago hub sat at 31%. The company average was 14%. She had asked her operations director about it twice. Both times she had received answers that were technically true and told her nothing at all. She needed to see it herself. So she had called in a favor with a regional HR contact who was not based in Chicago, arranged a short-term driver placement under a temporary employee profile, and arrived at the facility at 5:30 in the morning as Nora, just Nora. No last name in the break room. No title anywhere, new hire. Quiet. Forgettable, starting her first official solo route. The terminal manager had shaken her hand without making eye contact. The dispatcher had handed her a manifest and said good luck the way people say it when they mean nothing by it. A woman at the coffee station had offered her a cup without asking whether she wanted one, which was the kindest thing anyone had done since she walked through the door. She took the coffee, she took the manifest, she walked to the van. Chicago in February did not offer apologies. The wind came in hard off the lake and hit her the moment she stepped outside, cutting straight through the uniform jacket she had not been told was inadequate for this weather because the facility did not issue better ones. She made a note of that in her head, the way she made notes of everything, not on paper, not on her phone, just stored, filed, held. She had a very good memory. It was one of the things that had made her successful and occasionally made her difficult to be around. She had grown up in a house where you remembered everything because you could not afford to repeat mistakes. Her mother had worked 2 jobs in the same years. Nora was learning long division. Her father had left when Nora was 9, which was old enough to understand what it meant and young enough to spend the next decade being angry about it before she eventually replaced the anger with something more useful. She had paid for her first semester of college with money saved from 3 years of weekend work. She had dropped out in her second year, not from failure but from impatience. The thing she wanted to build could not wait for a graduation ceremony. She had been 22 when she leased the truck, 26 when she hired her first 10 employees, 31 when she took her first round of outside investment, which she hated and did anyway because it was necessary, 44 now, in a green jacket with the wrong insulation, watching Chicago pass by her window one traffic light at a time, thinking about a number. 31%. Every percentage point in a turnover rate is a person. She had learned that slowly, across years of running a company, and it was one of the things she believed more deeply than most business principles she had encountered. High turnover was not an operational abstraction. It was a collection of individual decisions made by individual people who had weighed their situation and concluded that somewhere else was better. Sometimes it meant the pay was too low. Sometimes it meant the work was too hard. Sometimes it meant the commute was unreasonable, or the schedule was inflexible, or the benefits did not cover the things that people actually needed covered. And sometimes it meant something else. Sometimes it meant the environment. She had seen it before. The kind of workplace that functions perfectly on its metrics and quietly destroys the people inside it. The kind of place where a manager's personality becomes the culture, unchallenged, because no one above him is paying enough attention. The kind of place where the people who most need stability and dignity, the ones for whom this job is not a stepping stone but a load-bearing wall, are the first ones to absorb whatever ugliness the environment produces. She did not know yet what Chicago was. She had a hypothesis and 31% and 42 stops and a broken radio. She turned onto her first street. The neighborhood was still waking up, porch lights off, a dog watching from behind a chain-link fence with the calm authority of something that had been doing this longer than she had. She parked, pulled a package from the back, walked to a front door, and left it exactly where the delivery note said to leave it, tucked out of the rain, visible from the entry, just like the training video had specified. She went back to the van. She did the next one, and the next. By the 9th stop, she had settled into a rhythm that she recognized from the early years, from the days before assistants and schedules and cars with drivers. There was a particular quality to physical, repetitive work that she had always respected and sometimes missed. It asked nothing from you except your body and your attention. It rewarded consistency. It was honest in a way that many things at her level of business were not. At the 14th stop, a man answered the door before she could knock, already reaching for the package, clearly having watched from a window. He was in his 60s, wearing a cardigan, and he said thank you twice before she reached the bottom step. The second thank you was quieter than the first. She thought about it as she walked back to the van. At the 22nd stop, she waited 3 minutes for someone to answer, and while she waited she looked at the neighborhood around her. A stretch of the city that was working class and proud of it, the kind of block where someone had hung a flag on every porch and someone else had planted window boxes despite the cold. She thought about who lived in these buildings and what they needed from a delivery driver, and whether the company that bore her name was serving them the way she had always said it would. She was 27 stops in when she got back to the hub for a midday package sort, and that was when she heard it. She was refilling her coffee in the break room. The room was maybe 30 feet wide, a long table down the center, lockers on one wall, a bulletin board on another. There were 4 other people in the room. One was a driver she had seen briefly in the morning briefing, a younger man, maybe late 20s, eating a sandwich with the focus of someone who had learned to eat fast. 2 were dispatchers she did not recognize. And 1 was the shift supervisor, a man named Dale Sutton, who had been pointed out to her during orientation as the person to go to with routing questions. Dale Sutton was leaning against the counter nearest the door. He was talking, and the 2 dispatchers were listening, and the younger driver was not listening but had also not left the room. She was pouring coffee. She was not looking at them. She heard her name before she heard anything else. Not her name, not Nora Vance, but the subject of what Dale was talking about. And what Dale was talking about stopped her hand on the coffee pot. She did not turn around. She did not change her posture or her expression or the speed of her breathing. She simply listened, in the way she had learned to listen when something required witnessing before it required action. She stood there and she heard everything. The coffee went cold in her cup before she touched it. She set it down. She picked up her manifest. She walked out to the van, and she drove the rest of her route. She delivered every single package. She made no calls, she sent no messages, she said nothing to anyone. But something had shifted behind her eyes, the way the temperature of a room shifts before a storm. And if anyone in the Chicago Hub Advance Delivery Group had been paying close enough attention, they might have looked at the quiet new driver in the worn baseball cap and understood, with sudden clarity, that the number on her back was the least interesting thing about her. Nobody was paying that kind of attention. That was also about to change. Owen Halley had been running the same Tuesday route for 11 months, and he knew every driveway on it the way a musician knows a song, not by thinking about it, but by the way his hands moved, automatically, the body remembering what the mind no longer needed to track. He was good at this job, objectively, measurably, provably good. His on-time rate was 93%. His customer satisfaction score sat at 4.8 out of 5, which was the kind of number that would have earned him a quiet commendation in a well-run workplace, and had earned him, in this one, absolutely nothing except the continuation of his employment, which he needed badly enough that he had decided to take the nothing and not complain. He was 30 years old. He had a daughter named Lily who was 6.5 and who corrected people when they said just 6, because the half mattered to her, and what mattered to Lily mattered to Owen in the way that children rearrange your sense of importance without asking permission. He had a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was a 20-minute bus ride from the hub. He had a car that needed new brake pads and possibly a rear tire, a repair that he had been budgeting toward for 3 weeks with the careful arithmetic of someone who had learned the hard way that financial margin is a luxury and not a right. He had a second job on Friday and Saturday evenings, driving for a car share service, the kind of work that exists in the space between one obligation and another, and pays exactly enough to make it worth the lost sleep. He had a mother named Gloria who was 58 and had a bad knee, and who watched Lily on the evenings when Owen's shift ran late, which happened more often than the schedule officially allowed, and less often than Owen's body could comfortably absorb. He did not have a partner anymore. That had ended 17 months ago, in the way these things sometimes end, not in a single dramatic moment but across a long series of smaller ones, each one quiet, each one slightly more final than the last, until the thing between them had simply become a formality waiting for paperwork to confirm what both of them already knew. He did not talk about it at work. He did not talk about it much anywhere. He had Lily 4 days a week, and the remaining 3 felt like holding his breath underwater, which was not a thought he shared with anyone, because there was nowhere at the Vance Chicago hub to share a thought like that and be received with anything other than discomfort or contempt. He had understood that early. The shift supervisor, Dale Sutton, had made it plain in the first 2 weeks. Not directly, Dale was not the kind of man who made things plain directly. He did it in the slow accumulation of small moments. The dismissive nod when Owen mentioned needing to adjust his pickup time by 15 minutes to align with Lily's school dismissal. The way Dale had repeated something Owen said to the group as though it were funny, when it was not funny and not intended to be. The particular tone Dale used when he said single dad, the slight softening of the syllables, the quotation marks that appeared around the phrase even when Dale was not using actual quotation marks, as though the category itself were something to be skeptical of. Owen had filed it away. He was good at filing things away. You got good at that when you had a child depending on you and no margin for the kind of conflict that cost you a job. He kept his head down. He ran his route. He came in on time and left on time when he could, and stayed late when he had to, and texted his mother a thank you every time she stepped in. And she always responded with a photograph of Lily doing something small and perfect, eating cereal with fierce concentration, drawing something unidentifiable on printer paper, asleep on the couch with her shoes still on. And those photographs were, on some of his harder days, the load-bearing structure of his entire mood. The Thursday in question had started normally. Lily had woken up with a slight temperature, not high enough to classify as sick, but high enough to leave Owen watching her eat breakfast with the careful attention of someone hoping the situation would resolve itself before it required a decision. The temperature came down after an hour. Lily ate most of her oatmeal and showed him a drawing she had made the night before of what she described as a horse, but which looked, with great confidence, like a rectangle with legs. He told her it was the best horse he had seen in a long time. She told him it was actually more of a llama. He agreed that this was correct. He dropped her at school. He went to the hub. At the start of shift briefing, he had asked Dale, quietly, briefly, standing slightly apart from the group, if there was any flexibility on his Thursday afternoon pickup. Lily's school had a parent information evening, a once-per-term event that her teacher had specifically asked parents to attend if possible, and Owen's shift technically ended 30 minutes after it started. He was not asking for a day off. He was asking if the last pickup stop on his route could be reassigned, or if he could start 40 minutes earlier to compensate. Dale had looked at him. He had used that look, the one that lasted just a beat too long, the one that said not that this is inconvenient but that you are inconvenient. And then he had said he would see what he could do, which was the phrase Dale used when he had already decided the answer was no and did not want to commit to it in front of anyone. Owen had nodded. He had gone to his van. He had run his route. At midday he came back to the hub for the package sort, and he had eaten his sandwich in the break room because it was too cold to eat in the van, and he had left his jacket at home that morning in the rush of monitoring Lily's temperature and confirming that a rectangle llama was indeed a noble and beautiful animal. He was not listening to Dale when Dale started talking. He was thinking about Thursday. He was thinking about the parent evening and the start time, and whether there was a way to ask again, or whether asking again would cost him something he could not afford to spend. He was doing the arithmetic of it in his head the way he did all arithmetic, methodically, without drama, looking for the number that worked. He did not hear exactly when Dale's conversation turned in his direction. He heard it when it arrived. He heard the word single dad delivered in that tone, the one with the invisible quotation marks, and he felt the specific kind of stillness that a person feels when they realize they are the subject of a joke they did not consent to. He kept his eyes on his sandwich. He kept his face neutral. This was a skill he had developed, and it had cost him something to develop it, though he could not have said precisely what. The dispatchers laughed at something Dale said. Owen did not move. He was aware, in a distant way, that there was another person in the room, the new driver, the quiet woman with the baseball cap, standing at the coffee station with her back to them. She had not said a word since she came in. She had not reacted to any of it visibly. He registered her presence the way you register background noise, present but not remarkable. He did not know who she was. He would not know for another 4 days. Dale kept talking. He had a way of building, of stacking one comment onto the last, each one a little sharper than the previous, calibrated to the room's response. He said something about the parent evening. He said something about how a job was a job and feelings were a personal matter. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. The worst of it was always delivered in a conversational register, almost friendly, as though cruelty were a completely ordinary way to fill a lunch break. Owen finished his sandwich. He stood up. He folded the paper bag neatly, which was a habit from his mother, who believed in not wasting anything, including packaging. He dropped it in the bin. He picked up his jacket from the chair beside him. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not cost him more than staying silent, and he had run that calculation enough times to know the result before he even started. He walked out to his van. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before he started the engine. He thought about Lily. He thought about the llama that was actually a horse. He thought about the parent evening and the teacher who had specifically asked, and the 30 minutes of overlap that was probably going to win, as it usually did, against the thing he actually wanted to do. He started the engine. He drove his route. It was a Tuesday in February, and the city was cold and gray, and going about its business with the particular indifference that cities manage better than people. And Owen Halley drove through it with his on-time rate and his 4.8 satisfaction score, and his folded sandwich bag in the bin back at the hub, and he thought about Thursday, and he said nothing, and he delivered every package exactly where it was supposed to go. The break room at the Chicago hub was not large enough to contain what Dale Sutton seemed to believe about himself. He stood with his back to the coffee station, weight on one hip, arms slightly crossed in the casual posture of a man who was comfortable being looked at, comfortable being the one the room oriented itself toward. He was 46. He had been a shift supervisor at Vance Delivery Group for 2.5 years, which was long enough to know where everything was, and not quite long enough to understand what he was building. He was funny in the way that some people are funny. He had timing. He had the ability to read a room and find the angle that would get a response, and he used that ability the way a person uses a tool they are genuinely skilled with easily, instinctively, without asking whether they should. The two dispatchers at the center table, Nathan Cole and Pete Farrow, had long ago settled into the role of Dale's audience. It required very little of them. They showed up. They laughed at the right moments. They kept the room warm. Nathan was 28 and had been with the company for 8 months. Pete was 33 and had been there a year and a half. Neither of them was a bad person. Neither of them, on a separate occasion, in a separate context, would have said the things that got said in that room on a Tuesday in February. But an audience changes the arithmetic. A room with a performer in it creates a particular social gravity, and gravity does not ask whether you want to be pulled. Nora Vance stood at the coffee station. She had her back to the room. She was doing what she had been doing, pouring coffee, adding nothing, taking up no space that would draw attention. She had been in the room for less than 2 minutes and had already concluded that Dale Sutton was the most interesting thing in the facility. Not interesting in the way that good things were interesting. Interesting in the way that a crack in a foundation is interesting. Small seeming, structural, the kind of thing that explains everything you were not able to explain from the outside. She had watched him earlier, during the morning briefing. She had watched the way the drivers arranged themselves slightly away from him, not far, just far enough. The unconscious repositioning of people who have learned to keep a small buffer between themselves and a source of unpredictable energy. She had watched the way he moved through the space, proprietarily, with the specific confidence of a man who has not been challenged in long enough that he has confused his unchallenged authority for earned authority, which is one of the more dangerous confusions a person in a position of power can make. She had filed all of this. She had made no judgments. Observations first always. Her operations director had taught her that early, when she was still young enough in the business to sometimes let her conclusions arrive before her evidence. She had the evidence now. Dale had been building toward something for the last several minutes. She had heard the conversation shift, the way a river shifts when it finds a new channel, from general complaint about route scheduling to something more targeted. He was telling a story. He was performing it, with the practiced ease of a man who has told a version of this story many times to rooms that have reliably rewarded him for it. The story was about Owen Halley. Not by name at first, by category. He called him the single dad scenario. He called it a scheduling situation that kept coming up. He used the phrase personal circumstances in a voice that made personal circumstances sound like a character flaw, the way a person might describe an allergy as a choice. Nathan laughed. Pete made the sound that people make when they are signaling that they are part of the group laughing without fully committing to being the one who is laughing loudest. Nora's hand was on the coffee pot. She did not grip it harder. She did not show anything. She had learned this decades ago, in rooms where she was younger and less certain than the men in them, in meetings where she had learned that the person who stays completely still while others perform their confidence is often the most powerful person in the room. Stillness was not passivity, stillness was collection. She collected. Dale said something about the parent evening. He said it had come up again, another schedule adjustment request, another case of someone not understanding that a job was a job. He said, and here his voice shifted into that lighter register, the one designed to produce laughter, that he was thinking about printing a sign for the break room. He suggested that the sign might read something about this not being a family counseling center. Nathan laughed. This time it was a full laugh. Nora set the coffee pot down. She set it down carefully. She did not place it heavily. She did not signal anything with the gesture. The pot went back on the burner, and she turned and looked at the room for the first time since she had entered it. And she looked at it with the expression she wore when she was doing the kind of looking that she would later be able to testify to, if necessary, precise, total, and very calm. Dale did not notice. He had moved on. He was saying something about the pattern, about how some people were not suited for this kind of work, about how the root demands were the same for everyone regardless of what was happening at home, and how making exceptions created a culture of everyone having a reason and nobody having accountability. This was where it became interesting, because he was not entirely wrong. She knew that. It would have been easier if he were entirely wrong, if what he was saying had been so far from reason that it was simple to dismiss. But Dale Sutton was a man who had wrapped something genuinely cruel inside something that sounded like operational logic, and that combination was far more dangerous than outright cruelty, because it gave the people around him a framework to agree with, and agreement made them participants, and participation made them responsible, and none of them, Nathan, Pete, the others who had been in this room on other days, none of them understood yet what they were participating in. A schedule adjustment request was a small thing. 30 minutes was a small thing. A parent evening at a 6-year-old school was a small thing. Except that small things were the entire architecture of a person's life when that person was doing it alone, with no margin, with a car that needed brake pads and a mother with a bad knee and a daughter who drew llamas and called them horses, and had a teacher who specifically asked the parents to come. She knew about small things. She had lived on them once. She picked up her manifest from the counter. She did not say anything to Dale. She did not look at him in a way that would register as significant. She walked to the door and she pushed it open and she stepped out into the February air, which was still cutting and still unforgiving, and she stood in it for one breath. Then she walked to the van. She had 15 stops left on the afternoon route. She was going to run them. She was going to run them because she had signed in as driver 4481, and driver 4481 completed the route, and because she had learned that the time between witnessing something and responding to it was not wasted time. It was the time in which a response became something more durable than a reaction, something that did not simply address the incident but changed the system that produced it. She drove onto the street and she let the city come through the windshield at her, building by building, block by block, all of it ordinary and all of it carrying the weight of the people inside it, going about lives that the people who ran companies like hers were very good at describing in aggregate and very often failed to understand individually. At the 19th stop of the afternoon, she waited outside a third-floor walk-up while an older woman with a cane made her way slowly to the intercom. The woman apologized for the wait. Nora said please do not apologize, that she had all the time. The woman thanked her genuinely, as though being told she was not an inconvenience were itself a gift. Nora thought about that on the drive to the 20th stop. She thought about the kind of workplace where being treated as not an inconvenience was something employees had to discover outside the building, from strangers. She thought about 31% and what it actually meant. And she thought about a little girl who had drawn a horse that was secretly a llama, and a father who had found the right answer. Yes, it was a llama, in the specific and gentle way of a person who understands that the right answer and the kind answer are, when you are paying attention, almost always the same thing. She delivered the last stop at 6:09 in the evening. She drove back to the hub in the dark. She returned the van keys to the dispatcher on duty, who said good first week without looking up. She signed out as driver 4481 for the last time. She walked to her car. She sat in it. The parking lot was half empty, and the lights made everything look flat and slightly too bright, and somewhere across the facility a door was banging in the wind, irregular, unhurried, the way things move when no one is watching them closely enough. She watched it. She thought about Owen Halley, who did not know her name. She thought about Dale Sutton, who thought the day had been entirely ordinary. She thought about what it meant to run a company versus what it meant to understand one. Then she took out her phone, and she called her head of human resources. The route that afternoon was 41 stops. Nora drove all of them. She did not take a shortcut. She did not resequence the manifest to end early. She completed the route in the order it was given, in the time that was expected of a new driver who had not yet learned where to save 4 minutes on the stretch between the industrial park and the neighborhood called Bridgeport, who had not yet learned that the loading dock on the south side would take a signature faster if you stood to the left of the door rather than the right, who had not yet learned any of the small efficiencies that drivers collect across weeks and months of the same roads. She drove it clean. She drove it exactly. At stop 14, a man with 2 small children opened the door before she finished knocking, both kids crowding the doorway with the natural democracy of children who believe all visitors are for them. The older one, maybe 4 years old, studied the package with the gravity of a customs inspector. She told him it was not for him. He considered this information carefully and decided he was satisfied. She carried the package to where the man pointed and left it in the dry. At stop 22, she waited in the van for 7 minutes because the address was a small apartment building and the buzzer was broken and she did not want to leave the package without a signature. When the resident came down, out of breath and apologetic, she said it was not a problem, that she had been exactly on time and so had he. The man looked at her for a moment the way people look when something small surprises them, and said thank you, and she said of course, and she went back to the van. She thought about what it costs a company when its drivers do the opposite, when they leave a notice at first attempt and drive away, because the culture or the pressure or the metrics favor speed over the person waiting on the 3rd floor for something they need. She thought about the gap between a company's stated values and the behavior it actually rewards, and how that gap was always wider than the people at the top understood, precisely because the people at the top were not in the van. At stop 31, she pulled into a narrow residential street in a neighborhood called Pilsen, a place she had been to once before, years ago, for a dinner she could no longer remember the reason for. She found the address and knocked and waited, and while she waited she looked through the small window beside the door into a kitchen. There was a refrigerator with things on it, drawings held by magnets, a printed calendar with colored markers on different days, a dry erase board with a list written in adult handwriting, and another list written in the careful block capitals of a child who has recently learned that letters have rules. She looked at it for a moment. She recognized the architecture of it, the scheduling, the color coding. the child's handwriting on a communal board claiming space in the household logistics, which was the kind of thing that happened in a home where a child was included rather than managed, where the rhythms of the family were shared rather than handed down. She recognized it because she had grown up in a version of it. Her mother had kept a board like that. Her mother had run a household on colored markers and lists, and the belief that if you wrote a thing down, it became real, and if it was real, you could work with it. The door opened. A woman in her 40s, still in work clothes, said sorry and reached for the package and thanked her, all in one smooth motion, the efficiency of someone who had managed to be perpetually behind and perpetually functional at the same time. Nora handed her the package. She walked back to the van. She sat for a moment before she started the engine. The street was quiet. A dog somewhere was making its opinion known about something. The light was going flat and gray, the specific gray of a February late afternoon in Chicago, the kind of light that turns everything the color of almost dark. She started the engine. She thought about Owen Halley. She thought about what she knew and what she did not know. She knew his name from the break room. Dale had used it eventually, had dropped it casually into the story the way you drop a prop, something to make the performance more specific. She knew he had a daughter. She knew he had asked for a schedule adjustment for a parent evening. She knew that the request had been received as a character flaw and performed as material for a room that had laughed. She did not know his whole situation. She did not know the arithmetic of his weeks. But she knew this. A company where a person cannot ask for 30 minutes on a Thursday evening to attend his child's school event without becoming the punchline of his supervisor's lunch break story. That company had built something into its culture that did not belong there and had no business being there. And a company where the person who created that culture had been left unchallenged long enough to become comfortable. And it was a company where the leadership, meaning her, specifically, with no one else to hand it to, had been absent from the right rooms for too long. She completed the last 11 stops. She brought the van back to the hub at 6:14 in the evening. The dispatcher on the evening shift took the keys without looking up. She signed out. She walked to her car, the ordinary one, the one without anyone waiting in it, parked in the far corner of the lot where it would not register as anything unusual. She sat. The parking lot was quiet. Most of the day shift was gone. A few cars remained. A light was on in the supervisor's office window, Dale's window, she now knew, from the facility map she had memorized before the trip. He was still there, finishing something, having a normal end to a day he believed had been entirely ordinary. She looked at her phone. She had 14 unread messages, all from the office, all things that had been waiting since 5:30 in the morning, with the patience that professional communications summon when they know there is nothing they can do about the person on the other end. She read none of them. She opened her contacts. She found the name of her head of human resources, a woman named Claire Dodd who had been with Vance Delivery Group for 6 years, and who had, over those 6 years, demonstrated the particular combination of precision and discretion that this conversation was going to require. She called her. Claire answered on the second ring. It was after 6 in the evening and she answered on the second ring, which told Nora, as it always did, that the right people were still the right people. She said, "Claire, I need to talk to you about the Chicago hub." And then she told her what she had seen and what she had heard, in the particular way she told things, not dramatically, not emotionally, but completely, with every detail in its place and every detail accurate, because the only way to fix a thing properly was to describe it properly first. Claire listened. She asked 2 questions. Nora answered them. When they finished, Claire said, "I will need 3 days to do this correctly." Nora said, "You have 4, do it correctly." She hung up. She sat in the car for another few minutes. The light in Dale Sutton's office window was still on. Somewhere in the city, Owen Halley was probably on a bus, or picking up Lily from his mother's apartment, or standing in his kitchen making dinner one-handed while his daughter sat on the counter and told him important things about llamas. She did not know that last part for certain. She believed it, in the way you believe things that feel true even before you have proven them, which is its own kind of evidence. She started the car. She drove out of the parking lot without looking back. The phone rang at 10:40 on a Monday morning, and Owen Halley almost did not answer it. He was in the van. He had 2 stops left before he needed to return to the hub for the midday sort, and he had learned, across 11 months, to treat the time between pickup and delivery with the seriousness it deserved. No distractions, no unnecessary pauses, just the root and the math of it, and the satisfaction of a thing being done as well as it could be done. He looked at the screen. The number was not saved in his phone. The area code was Chicago, but the prefix was unfamiliar. He stared at it for one more ring, decided it was probably not something he could ignore, and answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice. It was calm and direct, and had the particular quality of a voice that was accustomed to being listened to, not because it demanded it, but because it had learned to earn it. She said, "Is this Owen Halley?" He said yes. She said, "My name is Nora. I work for Vance Delivery Group. I'm not calling about anything disciplinary. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I am calling because I want to ask you something, and you are under no obligation to answer, and whatever you tell me will not affect your position here. Do you have a few minutes?" He was parked at a stop sign. He said yes. She said, "I want to understand what this job needs to look like for someone in your situation to want to stay here long-term, not what the current system offers. What would actually work? I am asking because I think you know things about this facility that I need to know, and I think you have probably not been given a real opportunity to say them." He did not respond immediately. Not because he had nothing to say, because he had learned to be careful. He had learned that in this facility, saying the true thing sometimes meant you became the topic of someone's lunch break, and he had a daughter to think about and a job he needed, and both of those things had trained him, over many months, to measure his words against their cost before he spent them. She seemed to understand this. She said, "I know this feels like an unusual call. I know you have no particular reason to trust it. I am asking you to take a small risk and tell me what you actually think. I will do something with it. That is a promise I am making, and I keep my promises because I find it is simply more efficient." He almost laughed. He did not laugh, but the thing inside him that sometimes did that, in the moments when he did not expect it, moved slightly. He said, "Can I ask what your role is?" She said, "I am the founder of the company." He was quiet. She waited. She did not fill the quiet the way people do when they are nervous about silence. She let it sit, which was the behavior of someone who was confident that what they had said was sufficient, and that he would arrive at his response when he arrived at it. He said, "You are the person who started Vance Delivery Group." She said yes. He looked through the windshield at the street in front of him. A woman was walking a dog, a large tan-colored one, proceeding down the sidewalk with great dignity and no apparent interest in anything the day had to offer. He said, "All right, what do you want to know?" She said, "Tell me about Thursday." And he did. He told her about the parent evening and the 30-minute overlap, and the conversation with Dale that had produced nothing useful. He told her the way he told things, carefully, without exaggeration, the facts laid out in the order they occurred. He told her about Lily's teacher, and about the once-per-term meetings, and about the way Lily had described the event as the one where parents come and see what we made, which had been said with the particular casualness of a child, who did not yet know that there were parents who might not come, who was still operating under the assumption that of course she would be there. He told her about that. Then he stopped talking and waited. Nora said, I want to tell you that I am going to fix the scheduling issue. Not just yours, the structure. We are going to pilot something at this facility that gives drivers with specific caregiving responsibilities more flexibility in how their hours are arranged without any penalty to their pay or their standing. I am telling you this not as a consolation, but as information, because you should know it is happening. He said nothing. She said, I also want to tell you that the environment you have been working in is not something you imagined and is not something you should have had to absorb. That is being addressed separately. I cannot tell you more than that right now, but I can tell you it is not a small addressing. He said, Dale. It was not a question. She said, I cannot confirm specifics, but you are not wrong to put those two things together. He sat with that. He said, why are you telling me this? She said, because you asked for 30 minutes to attend your daughter's school event, and instead of getting 30 minutes you got turned into a story someone told in the break room for entertainment. That is not what I built this company to be. Telling you that it is being corrected is the least I can do. It is probably not enough, but it is what I have right now. He said, how do you know about the break room? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I was there. He thought about the break room. He thought about the morning he had eaten his sandwich and kept his face neutral and listened to Dale and walked out without saying anything. He thought about the other people in the room, the dispatchers, and the other person, the quiet woman at the coffee station, back turned, not reacting, not moving. He said, the new driver. She said, yes. He thought about that for a long moment. He thought about her standing there. He thought about the fact that she had heard it and had not reacted and had gone out and finished the route before she did anything at all. He said, you finished the route first. She said, I had a job to do. He said, before you called anyone about any of this, you finished your deliveries. She said, yes. He said, that is a very strange way to run a company. She said, I know. He looked at the dog, still making its way down the sidewalk with great dignity. It had paused to examine something near a fence post with the focused attention of an expert in its field. He said, my daughter made a drawing last week. She said it was a horse. Then she changed her mind and said it was a llama. And then I asked her which it actually was, and she thought about it very carefully, and she said it was a llama that started as a horse, which is a completely different thing. Nora said, that is a very good distinction. He said, she is very good at them. There was a pause. He said, are you going to be at the parent evening, the Thursday one? She said, no. I will be back in my office in about 48 hours, but you will be at the Thursday one. That I can promise you. He said, all right. She said, thank you, Owen. He said, sure. He hung up. He sat in the van. The dog had moved on. The street was quiet in the specific way of a Chicago residential block at midday, a resting quality, the neighborhood gathering itself between the noise of the morning and the noise of the afternoon. He had 2 stops left. He finished them. He went back to the hub. He did not see Dale Sutton when he returned. He would not see Dale Sutton again after that week, and when someone mentioned to him a few days later that there had been some changes in the supervisor structure, he said oh, and went back to his manifest and did not ask for details. The scheduling change rolled out on a Tuesday 3 weeks later. It was quiet, unannounced beyond a single internal notice, framed as a pilot program for family obligation flexibility. It allowed drivers with documented caregiving responsibilities to request shift adjustments with a minimum of 72 hours notice and a maximum of 2 per month, with approval required but no supervisory discretion, meaning the decision tree went to a neutral HR checkpoint, not to the judgment of whoever happened to be standing near the coffee station. Owen used it in his first eligible week. He was at the parent evening on Thursday. Lily had made a paper-mâché bowl in art class. She showed it to him with both hands, very carefully, as though it contained something precious and possibly liquid. The bowl was red on one side and orange on the other, not because she had planned it that way, but because she had run out of red and had made an executive decision, which was, her teacher told Owen quietly, very characteristic of Lily in general. He agreed that this was correct. He held the bowl on the bus ride home while Lily slept against his shoulder, her breath even and steady, and he looked at the orange and red bowl and thought about a voice on the phone that had said, "I was there, and I finished the route, and you will be at the Thursday one," and he thought about the particular quality of a promise made by someone who had already demonstrated, without advertising it, what their promises were made of. The bowl lived on the kitchen shelf for the rest of the year. Lily never explained why it was two colors instead of one. He never asked. At the Chicago hub, employee turnover fell to 17% by summer. By the following winter it was at 11%. The flexible scheduling policy left the pilot phase and became company policy at all Vance Delivery Group facilities, announced internally without a press release, without a ceremony, without anything except a memo that explained the change and the effective date. Nora Vance continued her undercover visits, not quarterly, as her COO had once cautiously suggested, roughly 4 times a year at different facilities, always unannounced, always in a uniform with a number on the back. Her board had long ago stopped calling it unusual. They called it her method, which was not entirely accurate. It was not a method. It was a belief. The belief was simple, that the distance between the person who runs a company and the person who runs the route is not a management problem or an organizational challenge. It is a choice. You can choose to know what your company actually is, which requires being in it, which requires discomfort and cold and a broken heater and a route manifest you did not write. Or you can choose to know what your company's dashboards say it is, which is a different thing entirely and costs you almost nothing. She had made her choice the first time she leased a truck and drove it herself because there was no one else to drive it. She had simply never stopped making it. The baseball cap stayed in the back of her car, the ordinary one, the one without the driver. She had bought 3 of them over the years, the same style, replacing the previous one when it wore out. They were not a costume. They were not a disguise in any meaningful sense. They were just the hat you wore when you were doing the job. She kept them there. She used them. The dashboard stayed green. The turnover numbers kept moving in the right direction. The people in the vans went out every morning in cities she had driven herself and delivered things to people who needed them, and most of those people said thank you in the way of someone who means it, and some of them said nothing, and all of them received what they were waiting for, placed exactly where it was supposed to go. That was the job. She had always understood it that way. The numbers were how you measured whether the job was being done. They were not the job. The job was the person at the door, the broken buzzer, the wait. The job was the bowl that was 2 colors because someone ran out of red and made a decision. The job was knowing the difference between a horse and a llama that started as a horse, which is a completely different thing. She knew the difference. She always had.